Welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Podcast, where we seek to elevate your leadership and transform your workplace. My name is Dominic Seal. I'm delighted to be the host of this show. With my team at eqstrategist, we seek to bring you a dose of healthy inspiration and practical insights into how to enhance team performance, cultivate resilience, foster collaboration, and shape culture. The following is conversation with Brent McAlister, CEO of Northern Grampians Shire Council. With over 25 years of senior local government experience across Australia and New Zealand, Brent has led innovative economic development initiatives, tackled housing challenges, and championed disaster recovery and rebranding success. In this episode, we explore Brent's leadership journey, the traits that elevate leadership beyond a title, and his insights on vulnerability, resilience, and self-care. We also discuss how to approach difficult conversations with courage and compassion. Brent's passion for making a difference shines through as he shares his strategies for building thriving, sustainable teams. Super grateful for you spending some time with us and passing on some of your wonderful wisdom to our audience here. You know that this podcast is about leaders and leadership, Brent, and you've had more than 25 years senior experience in the local government space, leadership positions, and all that sort of wonderful stuff, making differences to the community through your town planning expertise, sustainability, attracting workers to different regions. Summarize for us, maybe share with our audience first and foremost. Give us a little bit about your 5-minute backstory. Help them learn a little bit more about Brent McAlister.
Yeah, look, I'm a Kiwi, born in Invercargill, which is right at the end of the South Island. And they call the South Island the mainland. So that's my origin. Look, I had a bit of an unfortunate start in life, in that at the age of 13, my mother died, and my father lived in Australia at the time, and so we pretty much left destitute, which was a tough start to life, and often I think I could have gone the criminal way or a more productive way, to be frank with you. I can remember my brother doing burglaries and all sorts of things at the time, and when you're left abandoned, really, and it's a tough thing. But anyway, I worked 2 jobs in Queenstown at the time, and got enough money to go to university, basically self-funded. And then I decided to. My mother was big on education, so as a mark to her, and also I wanted to make something good in my life. I couldn't remember at high school the teacher saying to me, I remember saying I want to be a town planner, and the teacher, it's amazing how teachers can either have a good influence or a bad influence. I had 2. One said, you're not bright enough to be a teacher. And then someone else around the age of 13, 14, when my mum died, nurtured me. Ironically, I was one of those people that just said, well, I'm going to prove you wrong and come back with a degree and shove it in your face and see what you what you think about that. So I actually went on to do a town planning degree, and it's funny, the other teacher I still keep in contact with today, and he's actually moved back to Christchurch. So it's amazing what influence your high school teachers can either have for good or bad. I actually thank that teacher that said I'd never be a town planner, because because I think I was the 5% of people that said, right, I'll show you and prove you wrong. Sadly, probably 90% of people would say, yeah, okay, you're right, and wouldn't do it. So I don't think those sort of teachers should be in the system, but I thank that person because it actually stimulated me into becoming a town planner.
Wow, absolutely amazing. You know, your story always reminds me that people do make a difference, and yet ultimately it's the choices that we make in those situations. And that's led on to a long career and history. Tell us a little bit about your career history since then,
Look, I've worked in 3 states in Australia, Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales. I won't tell you which one I think is the best. We'll keep that for later, maybe. And about 10 years in New Zealand. Because my dad was in Australia, as I said previously, I think where you holiday, you tend to go and actually immigrate to. So I actually moved over here after 10 years in local government in New Zealand. And then, as many Kiwis, I went back after 7 years and then came back again. It's so easy to come back and forth from New Zealand. I often think Kiwis make the move many times. I've done it twice. But look, I've essentially gravitated for probably 23 of those years in directorship roles, mainly in town planning, economic development, community services. And then for the last 2 years, I've actually bobbed up to the CEO role at the Northern Grampians Shire Council. So I thought, well, I've had such a long career, I may as well finish it off and get the top job. And that's, of course, has raised a whole lot of other challenges that only CEOs would know about.
Wonderful. We fall in love with leaders everywhere we meet. And you and I first met at Wellington Shire Council. We had the blessing of being invited to help with your team there. And then at Grampians Shire, taking us to so many amazing places across Australia. I know you've also had a lot of strong track record in disaster recovery. Not that you chose to be in there, but you're kind of thrown into those situations. And yet, one thing that always stood out for me, Brent, is your sincerity, your authenticity. You're always someone who just says it as it is. Even you sharing your backstory there, Brent, too many leaders, when I work in organizations, the staff don't even know that about the backstory of their leaders. And too many people don't even know their leaders really as well as they could, because their leaders are not open about sharing that. You share the nice bits, and people see that CEO position and wonder, geez, boy, this person must be absolutely amazing. And yet when you look at the backstory, all of us have this tremendous human being in us that has gone through all the stuff that the stuff that others typically go through. And yet very often they look at people in high positions and say, oh, for some reason, either you're cleverer than me or haven't had it as tough as me, and that's how you got it there. So thank you so much for sharing that. And share with me, you've worked with so many leaders, in some leaders who are just leaders by position, and some that are leaders that you truly admire. Through your long journey, what would you say are maybe 3 qualities that in your view are essential for a leader today?
Yeah, look, I definitely vulnerability would be the number one on my list. I can always remember, and you're talking about some of the old bosses I worked for, I won't say where and who it was, but I can still remember after about 4 months of having this job, asking the HR manager why the CEO, I had 5 daughters, and never ever asked about my 5 daughters or my, who I was, or you're talking about your private life and your background. And I still remember this ringing in my ear. She said, just in case he has to get rid of you. And it's sort of a very interesting truth, isn't it? That if you actually don't get to know people, you can be quite callous and heartless to that person, which is kind of a sad truth. And it sort of, to me, says, and I know that some leaders have a very military style of thinking, that don't get to know that, separate the person from the job. And it almost goes back to the old days of officers' messes, and then the rest of the staff eat in a different place. And I think it's an old military concept. I completely disavow that, and I don't agree with it. I'm a great believer in getting to know everything as much as the person is comfortable with about their private life. I mean, obviously you don't poke your nose in where it's not wanted, but knowing who their spouse is, their partner, their kids, their background, is all part and parcel of leadership in my book. So vulnerability sort of plays to that idea that you've got to be the true person. It's interesting. Recently, I have a staff announcement, or I talk to the staff every Thursday, and I actually said to the staff about some of my early mistakes as a leader. I can remember early on in my leadership career, one of the CEOs. Someone in local government, you get involved in lots of minutiae. I can remember a lady complaining about a parking ticket, and I had many projects on at the time, and I gave her very quick, very little attention and saw her out the door very quickly. And I remember this, and she complained to the CEO, and the CEO got me in. His name was Kemp, a Maori guy in New Zealand, and he said to me, mate, customer is king. Don't forget about your projects. He sort of told me off, and I still remember. I recalled that to the staff here, and the interesting thing was, one staff member came up to me, and it wasn't the subject matter of the parking ticket. It was the fact that I had actually admitted a mistake, and that I'd learned from it, and to me that allowed her to feel okay that she could make mistakes, honest mistakes, and that I was a real person. And I wasn't this sort of bulletproof CEO that had never made mistakes and didn't suffer mistakes. And it was a very interesting observation from a staff member. So I'm a massive on vulnerability. I didn't learn it by design. It was an accident. When I was in Lismore, I managed the Lismore flood recovery in 2018, a shocking disaster for the city. And I just fell into the whole management of that. But what it showed to me is I completely burnt myself out because I worked enormously hard. And what it showed to me was two things. One, to look after yourself, and two, to build resilience. And I went on a 5-day Byron self-compassion and awareness retreat, and I thought I'd last 20 minutes because I'm a highly active, overactive sort of character, and I thought there's no way I can sit for 5 days and just meditate and do those sorts of things. But I lasted 5 days, but it showed to me that you must look after yourself, you must be vulnerable, and that is the major leadership quality I believe in every leader. If you're not vulnerable, you're missing out on the number one criteria. Yeah, just a few other things, Dom. I'm a great believer in visibility. Yeah, one leader, and I won't say where, prided themselves on being invisible. I'm not sure why that person would pride themselves on that. I'm the opposite. I do a thing called back to the shop floor. Actually, every month I go and work for half a day as a trainee in different parts of the workplace. And I just think that is an incredible privilege to work in those areas. I've been sacked a few times because I haven't cleaned toilets properly or whatever. But you build rapport with staff, you build respect, and you get to know, the job. And I think so many leaders operate out of the office and dictate, but really, wisdom is in the anthill, and listen to the ants. There'd be a couple of things there, Dom. Probably the final one for me is strategy. And it's interesting, probably out of all the CEOs I've worked for, probably none of them, maybe one of them has been a strategist. Most of them are tacticians, because to survive as a CEO, you have to be very tactical and canny, but very few of them are strategic. And certainly I'm a strategist. So, and probably the one thing that I have learned over the years about strategy as a leader is what I call the 20-80 rule. There's usually 20% of the issues and the challenges and the priorities will affect 80% of the organisation. And I often call it panning for gold, that it's a matter of talking to people, doing a bit of a stock take, a listening tour in the organisation, the community, and ultimately coming up with that 20% of gold that you need to focus on. Because if you don't focus on the 20%, you'll actually dissipate your effort. So that's held me in good stead, that panning for gold over the years. I've often been hired by CEOs as the strategist because, as I say, I reckon I haven't really met a CEO who is a strategist. Maybe, Dom, you have, but it just doesn't seem to be a criteria for boards and councils to employ people.
Wow. Wow. Three gems there. I think vulnerability, visibility, and having that strategic thinking, and really treasure that of you. I know, Brent,
Yeah.
many of our wonderful audience will be super interested. You speak about vulnerability and clearly psychological well-being. Our technical skills, our work experiences very often give us the skills that we need to do our jobs. Town planning in your case was a long part of your history. And
Yep.
yet, I know that today, with the pace of change and disruption just being the only constant, if you like, what advice would you give to managers looking to enforce or already build that culture of resilience within their teams?
Look, I think at the end of the day, we had you into our organisation and I didn't actually meet you for a long time because it was during that 2-year lockdown in Victoria, but I recognised that people working it from home were having impacts both in their work life and private life. You'll recall that, Dom, that to get across borders, people had to get permits. They had funerals to go to they couldn't go to. So their whole private life was being impacted, and also the work life, the fact that we're stuck at home for 2 years. So I think the first thing for a leader is to make sure that every team has a 1-day team building exercise every year. I use the analogy that everyone takes their car in for a warrant of fitness or a roadworthy once a year. Okay, so the car is more important than the team. Is that what we're saying? I think if we don't do it, that's what we are saying. So why not invest 1 day every year at least to do team building, to do some resilience training, so that people have a toolkit there when hard times come. And let's face it, hard times will come to every individual. Do they have breathing exercises that they can go to? Do they have, I personally do counting. It might seem a bit odd, but it's actually quite a recognised self-help technique that as you're going along, count the lampposts, count the trees, and what that does is it drives you into the present. And so that's where that's at. Meditation. I do ice baths now, and I know it's a big fad, but at night as a CEO, it's a tough gig, CEOs, particularly local government, and it can result in sleeplessness. So I now do an ice bath at about, 8 o'clock. And in the winter here in Northern Grampians, you don't need ice, I can tell you that. It goes down to 6 or 7 degrees. So for a Scotsman like me, that's kind of nice. I don't have to buy the ice. But it produces melatonin and it allows me to sleep. Because if you can't sleep as a CEO or a leader, you're really going to be down. So you need to, the biggest advice to any leader, have that 1 day investment in your team every year, and have at least half of that day devoted to building the toolkit for well-being, self-help, resilience. That would be my biggest piece of advice.
Wonderful. And it sounds like also being a model of self-care as well. You are intuitively someone who have embraced many of that and continue to stay, as you can see, the audience can tell what a wonderful speaker and communicator, leader you are, just through your stories and your willingness to share.
Yeah.
And so, but vulnerability, one of those things that, certainly in my culture growing up, we're not encouraged to share too much of ourselves in case someone takes advantage of it. And you mentioned that you learned it through the hard way, through what happened up in Lismore. But what other influences were there in your life that helped you? What got you into that I think you mentioned a retreat? What got
Yeah,
you?
look, a couple of things, Dom. I can remember applying for a job down here because I've got 4 of my 5 daughters are down here, and I
Right.
still remember. Looking. I think it was Mornington Shire. I applied for a job, and they had a leadership values, and I thought, oh, this is fascinating. And
Okay.
one of their leadership values, and I still remember it. It's like a neon light in my mind. It said that to be a leader in that organization, you had to be comfortable not knowing everything. Isn't that amazing? I think leaders, they get asked by a board or a council or a media, what do you know about this? And and I've seen it numerous times on TV when CEOs run into strife. For example, the Commonwealth Bank recently with their $3 charge. If you don't know it, well, then say so and defer to someone else. I just think that so many leaders think it's a badge of honor and masculinity, dare I say it, which is a big issue around family violence, the masculinity thing. You have to know every answer. You have to be right. Well, why? I think it's actually a badge of honor and a mark of leadership to actually not know everything. So I think that's a positive. Look, the other big influence on me is my second oldest daughter. She's really been my mentor. She was the one, she said to me one day, Dad, what do you think is the top leadership quality? And I think I said something like vision or something of that order. Or achievement. And she said, I reckon you're wrong, Dad. And I went, oh, really? And she said, I reckon vulnerability is. And I didn't really agree with her, but I stewed on it for several months. And I actually have come up that is the number one quality. And it's interesting. Recently, I think also leaders have to put themselves in a vulnerable position. So, for example, every 6 months or so, and this seems odd, but I'll throw it out there. I dress up as a bear. My wife has got
You
a
dress
bear
up as
suit.
a beer?
As a bear, as a polar bear or a brown bear.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
got it.
with the head and the full suit, right?
Really?
And I go and read the kids' books. And recently, the CEO of Geelong, which is a big council, she dressed up as an elf. I think it was at Christmas. And I remember sending her a LinkedIn message saying, good on you. Like it's a massive city and you've dressed up as an elf and walking around Geelong. And obviously that's a mark of vulnerability. I mean, I've had some staff criticize me and go, oh, well, you're letting down the side. You dress up as a bear. How demeaning for a CEO or a director to be dressing up as a bear. So you do get criticism for it, but I think putting yourself into a place of vulnerability is if you're not good at being vulnerable, go and put yourself in a place of vulnerability, and then you'll soon find out what it's about, and you'll gain great respect with the community. I mean, I'm often thinking, what does the council think? Because they tend to be older people, and maybe they have a certain paradigm of what a CEO or director should be doing. But I sort of think, be yourself, and certainly dressing up as a bear is one of my identities. So I do that to try and maintain my vulnerability.
Wonderful. I can only imagine how much loved and appreciated you are everywhere you go, given that you're just a human being, quite beyond the title, and people feel safer with people that where they can see and appreciate the whole human being rather than the bloke with the suit or the bloke that has the title. And that's such a hallmark. And
Yeah.
I know,
And I think you make a good point there, Dom. It says a message to staff. It's okay to be a human being themselves. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to make a mistake. So I think by doing that, it gives staff permission to be vulnerable, and to try new things, make mistakes. If you don't do that, you have this wooden military style of leadership. It says to them, it's not okay to be vulnerable. It's not okay to be human. So it's about permission. I think you raise a very good point there.
Wonderful. Brent, you know that one of the key challenges that I'm finding lots of managers face in organizations today when they embrace that vulnerability, and one of the reasons why they're not as prepared to be as vulnerable as they can be is knowing that there will be times when they have to have that difficult conversation with their staff. And as you alluded earlier through the military example and all that kind of stuff, which may have been the reason why leaders and the people and subordinates don't try to get too close, because it just makes those difficult conversations a lot easier, right?
Yes.
And yet people are afraid that you will swing too much to the other end, and then you could become mates and pally, and it's just hard, to give that feedback. And everyone has blind spots. What encouragement, what advice would you give to someone? I mean, clearly in your role, very often you have to have those courageous conversations with people, not because they're bad, but because they just have blind spots on their potential, etc., etc. How do you handle that boundary, right, between mateship and still having that, boundaries? How do you manage that?
Yeah. Look, I would have, I have made a number of people redundant. I've terminated people. I've had disciplinary actions over the years. What's the one key to success? Look, the one key for me is play the ball, not the person. Separate the behaviour from the person. And recently, one of my senior staff had to be involved in a difficult situation, and I gave them that strategy. And if you separate the behaviour, and let's face it, I'm a glass half full person, so I think apart from maybe one or two people in my life, everyone has value. In fact, probably even those couple of people that have done me bad over the years still have value. So if you start the premise, every person has value, and really their behaviour doesn't necessarily reflect their values. So if you start with that premise, everyone has value, and their behaviour is not, don't associate with their person or their value, I think it sends you in good stead. And I can remember one situation, I won't name the organisation or the person, where I had to make a person redundant. That person hadn't actually slept for 6 months, so they were the wrong person in the wrong job, obviously. And I still remember having about a 45-minute conversation with that person after I had made that person redundant. And I was asking about his family. I was asking about what he was going to do next, where he was going. And I was able to do that in a very caring and compassionate manner, because the behaviour was separate to the person. He had great value. The fact that he couldn't sleep for 6 months was shocking. So I actually think I did him a favour, and he's now ended up in a position that is far better suited to his capability. He's sleeping at night. His family is feeling much better about everything. He was causing a major disruption to our service because it was a square peg in a round hole, and it had to be fixed. But I could have that conversation because I separated the behaviour from the person. I think if you combine them, it just becomes so personal that you start to, you raise your tone, you get defensive, it becomes personal attack on them, they then do a personal attack on you. So that would be the one gem that I've learned, and it served me extremely well over the years. That's my one recommendation, Dom.
Mate, the more I hear about your experiences, we loved and appreciated you at level 10 before we had this call, and man, it's taken it to level 20. You are extraordinary. In the public sector, it is so tough to have those conversations because very often I hear things like, oh, I had that conversation and the person goes on stress leave and complains about me to the HR, and now now the spotlight is on me. I don't need that spotlight. So it's like, hey, easier not to have those conversations. Have you ever had
Yeah,
that situation where you had maybe kind of, I wouldn't say backfired, but it had that, escalation. This person
yeah,
is accused of
yeah.
bullying and stuff like that.
Yes,
And
yes. And
uh, yeah.
yeah, that's a good one. And look, particularly for those CEOs out there,
Mm,
I went through, in one of my jobs, a sort of quite significant sort of bullying claim, if you like. Not in the current role, but further back. And I won't say when and who, obviously. And it's very hurtful.
mm,
It can be very personal because
mm,
I was just talking about when you're dealing with redundancies, separate the person from the behaviour.
mm,
When the situation is about you, it then becomes difficult to do that. But the sort of the best piece of advice I had from a previous CEO is the reason that it is the person is often having a go at your position, not
mm,
necessarily you. So one of
mm,
the joys of being a director or a CEO is that you are the top of the tree, and people are going to have a shot at you because you are in that position. If you were the cleaner, you wouldn't get
wow.
those sorts of claims. And
Wow.
because you are the CEO or the director, it is your position. And that really helped me because it meant that, hey, this person is having a go at your position. Therefore, don't be too worried about it. The other thing that I'm on TikTok, and you get great advice on
Oh,
TikTok.
you are.
And I do. I think TikTok is brilliant. And I still remember this lady saying, and it was about a very similar situation, a bullying situation, having a go at me. And she said, it's often more about that person than yourself. And so, and that helped me too, that it's, that person's situation, personal circumstances, being made redundant or terminated or whatever, has really screwed them up. And I get it. And therefore they're reacting to you. And so it's more about what's happening to them than about you. And so that helped my mind. And the other fact of saying, hey, it's about your position and you're going to get it. So those are my two pieces of advice to CEOs.
Good on you. Good on you. And any managers for that matter, right? Because very often when you're not managing performance, ultimately your team's performance is your responsibility, to hold yourself accountable to that, and not doing it because, and not
Yep.
not doing it because it's difficult, but being prepared to be vulnerable. But I just love, that's a gem. That's a gem to see yourself whenever you are possibly feeling attacked, to see that they're just challenging the position and it's about them, not about you. Priceless.
Yeah.
Brent, you know what? I know that just even in the last half hour, lots of our audience will have questions and would have fallen in love with you, and yet we want to keep the podcast brief so that people get maximum value from it. Last question, if I may, many years from now,
Yeah.
looking, how would you most like to be remembered, Brent?
Oh, that's a good one. I can remember me and my wife 40 years ago being on the beach in New Zealand, Waihi Beach, and we struck a guy from, I think it was Amway. Do you remember Amway?
Oh, yes, I
You
do.
know, yeah.
My first encounter
And
with MLM.
that's
Gave me
right.
such a
So
negative perception of sales, to be honest with you.
it did. But he said, it must have been part of the Amway sales technique. He said, what would you write on your gravestone? And he asked my partner that as well. And we're on the beach and you're very contemplative in holidays. And we thought, oh, we had a big discussion about what would be on the gravestone. And I think it's a good thing for everyone to think about what would you have on your gravestone. So I'll start with my wife, who's a completely different person to me. And she had on her gravestone, she loved. That was her gravestone etching. And she, if you know Dells, that's just,
Awesome.
she's everything about love and compassion. Works in a rest home as a chaplain, so obviously she's doing her life work there. And then on my gravestone, I had he made a difference, and that's pretty much my motto. That whenever and this would be a piece of advice for a leader, manager, director, CEO, that whenever you work out what's on your gravestone, and when you apply for a job, only apply for that job where your motto can be fulfilled. I've often turned down jobs that have offered 30 odd grand more, or, great car and benefits and what have you. And because I didn't have a gut feel that I could make a difference, then, whereas if someone CEO said, I've got a shocking big challenge here and there that I have capability in, and I need you to help me in that area, I can make a difference there. So I've always used that as a basis for going to deciding if I apply for a job and accept one, is my gravestone motto. So there we go, Dom. You'll what would you have on your gravestone, bro? Have you worked that out?
Thank you so much. Thanks for asking that question. Yeah, I would love to. Mine's slightly longer. He shone brightly, loved deeply, and made each and every day. And was the mirror that helped people see the light in themselves. Anyway, something along the line.
No, nice.
Not as succinct and beautifully phrased as yours.
Yeah. I like the shine brightly. I think that's a good one. That suits you well.
Thank you, man. Well, I think with that, that's such a wonderful way to close this, and a message to our wonderful audience. I think they can tell just by what you've shared why you were picked by me, someone that I wanted to learn with and journey with. Thank you so much. It's an absolute gem. I've gotten so much from it. You certainly made a difference to this call, and just to get out to the world and touch even more lives, and to bring you back sometime again if you're so up to it.
No, we'll see if people take to my oddball style. But,
man, you just be you, mate. You are a gem.
Good. No, well done, Dom, and you shine brightly. So that's a great thing to put on your gravestone, man. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well done.
Make it the most extraordinary day you deserve. You've already started it out perfectly for each and every one of us.
Yeah, thank you.